You saved my life, human. Now this legendary blade is yours. Captain Emily Barnes had been on countless dangerous missions before, but this one felt different. She had always trusted her training, the precision of the Alliance, and the reliability of her shuttle. But none of that mattered now. Her shuttle had malfunctioned mid-flight, spiraling into unknown territory, the land of the Eriks. The Eriks were a race of fierce, blue-skinned warriors with a reputation for defending their homeland with brutal force. No one had ever made it through their defenses alive, especially not humans. Yet, here she was, alive but captured, bound by thick, rough ropes that bit into her wrists. The Eriks had no use for prisoners, but something about Emily intrigued them. And now, she was their captive. She was brought to a sprawling alien camp, surrounded by towering structures made of dark stone and strange glowing crystals. The air was thick with the sound of alien voices, guttural and harsh, mingling with the clattering of weapons and the stomp of armored feet. The Eriks warriors were preparing for something, but what? Emily had no idea. Her mind raced, her instincts alert. The silence from her captors suggested they were waiting for something, a signal, an order, or perhaps the council's decision. Enjoying the accommodations, human? A gruff voice asked. Emily raised her head, meeting the amber eyes of her captor. It was Commander Zorith, leader of the Eriks. He stood tall, nearly 7 feet, his green skin shimmering under the fading light. His broad shoulders were adorned with intricate tattoos, blue lines that curved and swirled across his body like ancient runes. He was a terrifying sight, but Emily wasn't one to show fear. Instead, she smirked, despite her situation. I've had worse, she replied, flexing her fingers as much as the bindings would allow. She had to keep calm, had to maintain control of her mind. She knew better than to show weakness. Though your hospitality leaves something to be desired. Zorith grunted, an amused sound that held more contempt than humor. You humans, he said, shaking his head. Always clever with your words, even when death is staring you in the face. He leaned in closer, his breath heavy. Is that what awaits me? Death? The question hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. Emily's stomach twisted, but she held her ground, forcing a calmness she didn't truly feel. She knew the Eriks were dangerous, but they weren't mindless killers. They valued strength. They would respect her if she proved her worth. Isn't that what always waits for us? She asked coolly, her voice steady despite the coldness creeping into her veins. Or is that just the way your kind handles business? Zorith's gaze sharpened. His amber eyes flicked toward his warriors, who had gathered around them, watching the exchange in silence. But Emily wasn't done. I can't be the only one to notice the tension in the air. You're preparing for something. What's happening tonight? He didn't answer immediately, but she could see the flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of respect, perhaps. Zorith wasn't stupid. He knew Emily was more than just another human soldier. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. Tonight, the council meets. Your fate will be decided. As he turned to leave, Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The council? That meant a decision would be made. One that could either save her life or end it. She needed to learn more about the Eriks and fast. Time was running out, but there was no easy way to escape. Her shuttle was beyond repair, and the Eriks warriors had her surrounded. She was a prisoner in their camp, and without a weapon, her chances of survival were slim. But she wasn't giving up. She couldn't afford to. Days had passed since she was captured, and Emily had spent every moment studying her captors, watching their patterns, listening for any hint of weakness. She could hear them talking late at night, discussing the impending attack on their enemies, the Wreck clan. But what was most troubling was the way Zorith spoke about his daughter. She was a fierce warrior, one who commanded respect in her own right. Emily had caught glimpses of her, Lasara, tall and lean, her body adorned in gleaming armor that reflected the alien moonlight. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, always scanning for threats. The coldness in her gaze reminded Emily of herself, of the steely resolve she had to show when things went south. But Emily had a feeling that Lasara would be a problem. Zorith's daughter didn't trust humans, and she was vocal about it. She had even suggested that Emily should be executed immediately, calling all humans treacherous and unworthy of life. The sound of marching feet drew Emily from her thoughts. Zorith was approaching, flanked by Lasara and several of his elite warriors. The tension between them was thick, a silent communication of their distrust toward Emily. "You will meet my daughter now," Zorith said as he approached, his voice full of authority. "She has a unique perspective on your kind." Lasara's eyes flicked to Emily with obvious disdain. "You think you're special, human?" she said, her voice smooth but venomous. "You're just a prisoner. Nothing more. You will never be one of us." Emily locked eyes with her. "I'm not here to be one of you," she said, her voice calm but full of resolve. "I'm here to survive. And if you're not careful, I'll make sure you regret underestimating me." Lasara scoffed, but Emily could see the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. Despite her bravado, Lasara was as uncertain about this situation as Emily was. Zorith had made a decision that none of them fully understood, but Emily could feel it, a spark of opportunity. Whatever was coming, she had to be ready. She had to prove her worth to them before it was too late. The night was growing darker, and the air seemed charged with an unknown energy. Emily could feel the weight of the Eric's camp's impending conflict. Something big was coming. And whatever it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about winning their respect. And that would take more than just skill. It would take bravery, wit, and a willingness to fight alongside them. As the night deepened, Emily's mind raced. She didn't know what the council would decide, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going down without a fight. The camp was alive with noise, the air thick with anticipation. Eric's warriors, covered in ceremonial armor, marched in precise formation, preparing for something massive. The sky above was darkening, casting long shadows over the complex of stone buildings and winding paths. Emily, still bound by the same rough ropes, was thrown into a makeshift cell, a small hut on the edge of the camp. The walls were adorned with strange alien symbols, glowing faintly in the low light, casting eerie patterns on the floor. She sat against the wall, her back stiff from the uncomfortable position, but her mind was far from the ache in her muscles. She knew time was running out. Every moment in the Eric's camp made her feel more like a pawn, her life hanging in the balance. The warriors around her didn't speak her language, but their glances, those sharp, knowing stares, spoke volumes. She could feel their eyes on her as they passed, studying her with suspicion and curiosity. They weren't just watching a human, they were watching someone they didn't understand. "Quiet, human," one of the guards muttered as he passed. The voice was gruff, like the rasp of stones scraping against each other. Emily kept her head down, her heart racing. The council. It was clear now that it was coming. Their decision would be made tonight. She could only guess what that decision would be. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. It was Zorith, his heavy boots thudding against the ground as he walked into the small hut. His eyes locked onto hers, cold but calculating. Behind him, Lasara followed, her expression unreadable but filled with a sense of purpose. Zorith crossed his arms, towering over Emily. The air seemed to grow heavier with every second that passed, as if the tension between them was palpable. "I trust you are enjoying your stay, human?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Emily lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I've had worse," she said, her words steady, even though her pulse quickened. Zorith's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "You speak like your kind always does, so full of bravado, even in the face of certain death." His voice dropped, filled with something darker now. "The council will decide your fate tonight. If you are to live, it will be because you prove your worth to the Erics." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, sent a chill down Emily's spine. It was clear he didn't see her as an enemy, nor as an ally. She was just a test, a challenge to be met, and it would be decided whether she was worth anything. She knew the Erics didn't take kindly to weakness. Lasara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Father, what if she is just a distraction? What if this human is only here to weaken our warriors, to divide us?" Zorith's amber eyes flicked to his daughter, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Perhaps," he said, his voice heavy with thought. "But we shall see." He looked back at Emily. "You've killed 2 of my best warriors. But that means nothing to me. You are a prisoner, and we have our ways of making enemies pay." Emily's heart beat faster, the weight of his words settling over her like a cloak. But she refused to let fear show. "You can do what you want," she said, her voice firm. but I'm not going down without a fight. Zoratha's lips tightened at her defiance, but he didn't respond. He turned toward the exit, his tall frame moving fluidly through the space. You'll be called when the time comes, he said over his shoulder, his voice cold. Until then, stay out of trouble. As they left, Emily was left alone in the quiet of the hut. The faint glow of the alien symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with her thoughts. She didn't know what would happen next, but the council's decision wasn't just about life or death. It was about power, and she would do anything to survive. A low hum filled the air, distant and strange, as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive with energy. She stood up, testing her bonds again, her mind racing for a way out. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Erics had underestimated her once, but if she was to prove herself, she needed to understand their world, their ways. If she was going to survive this, she needed to get into their minds, to see what made them tick. And if it came down to it, she would use their own beliefs, their honor, their warrior's pride, against them. Just then, the ground beneath her feet trembled as a horn blasted across the camp, a deep, resonant call that echoed through the air. The warriors froze. The tension that had already gripped the camp now exploded into action. It was no ordinary call. It was the signal of an incoming attack. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Zoratha's voice rang out from the distance. His orders barked with authority. Prepare for battle. We move out immediately. The chaos around her grew louder. The warriors quickly gathering weapons, shouting commands, and running to their positions. The camp was no longer just waiting for the council. It was preparing for war. Lysara appeared in the doorway, her eyes locking onto Emily's. Stay here, she ordered coldly. If you try to escape, you won't survive the night. Emily nodded, though inside, she was already planning her next move. The battle outside wasn't just a distraction. It was her opportunity. While the Erics fought for their survival, she would fight for hers. And she would need to use everything, every ounce of will, every scrap of strategy she had, to prove her worth. Zorath, the mighty leader of the Erics, might have underestimated her before, but he wouldn't again. And in the chaos of battle, she would prove to the Erics, and to herself, that she was more than just a prisoner. She was a warrior, and warriors never stayed captive for long. The horn blew again, this time in a longer, more urgent call. It begins, Emily whispered to herself, eyes steely with determination. This was it. The time to fight, to escape, to win her freedom, was now. The tension of the camp was about to snap, just like her chains. The Erics camp was in full chaos as warriors scrambled, moving with military precision. Emily stood at the edge of her cell, her heart pounding in her chest. The distant sounds of clashing metal, battle cries, and roaring war engines filled the air. The Erics were preparing for an assault, but it wasn't just any attack. This was something bigger, something that could change the entire balance of power. As the war horn sounded once more, Emily's instincts kicked in. She couldn't stay locked in this hut forever. If the Erics were in the middle of a battle, it was her chance. No matter what, she couldn't waste it. Her bindings were still in place, and her mind raced for a way to break free. She couldn't do it alone. She needed something more. She looked around, scanning the camp through the thin slats of her cell's walls. The noise outside was growing louder, and she could hear the warriors rallying. Then, a figure appeared. Lysara, the Erics warrior who had been watching her since her capture, who had looked at her like she was nothing more than a passing annoyance. But there was something else in her gaze now, a flicker of recognition. Emily didn't know whether it was respect or frustration, but it was there. Lysara's sharp eyes narrowed as she spotted Emily standing by the edge of her cell. Stay in there, she commanded coldly. Her voice was sharp, her grip tight around the hilt of her sword. You're a prisoner, not one of us. Emily's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. If you want me to stay in here, she said, her voice steady, you'll have to make sure the enemy doesn't get to me first. Lysara hesitated for only a moment, her eyes scanning the camp. She seemed to consider Emily's words. Then, with a quick motion, she slid her blade into its sheath and walked to the entrance of Emily's cell. I'll take care of your bonds, human. But don't think for a second that this means we're allies. Emily's heart raced as Lysara stepped forward. She had no idea why the Erics warrior was offering this chance, but she wasn't going to waste it. In a swift movement, Lasara cut through the ropes binding Emily's hands. The sudden release sent a wave of relief through her, but there was no time to savor it. The battle outside was escalating. "I don't know what your plan is," Lasara said, her voice colder than ever. "But if you even think of running, I'll hunt you down. Do not mistake this for mercy." Emily nodded quickly, her mind already on the chaos outside. She was no fool. She knew Lasara wasn't offering her freedom out of kindness. There was something bigger at play, and Emily was certain the Erics were far from done with her. But now she had a choice. A chance. As she stepped outside, the sight of the camp filled her with a sharp sense of purpose. The Erics were everywhere, rushing into battle positions, drawing their weapons, and preparing to defend against the incoming attack. They were warriors, proud and strong, but Emily had seen enough to know that no army was invincible. "Follow me," Lasara barked, her voice cutting through the sounds of the battlefield. She moved with purpose, her lithe body weaving between the tents and warriors. Emily kept close behind, adrenaline pumping through her veins. She had no idea where they were going, but this was her moment. They came to a large clearing near the center of the camp. Here, the Erics had gathered their most elite warriors, including Zorith, who was preparing for the battle ahead. His towering figure was unmistakable, his face hardened and set with determination. He was clearly the leader, and he moved with an air of command that made every warrior around him respect his every order. Emily's eyes narrowed. If she could gain his favor, it might be her ticket to not only surviving, but perhaps earning her freedom. But that wasn't her immediate concern. There was something else, the battle. The Wreck clan, they were the immediate threat. If she could prove herself useful, maybe she could secure a place among them. Perhaps even use the situation to her advantage. Zorith turned to face her as she and Lasara approached, his eyes studying her intently. His expression was unreadable, though his posture suggested a leader who had seen countless battles. "You've proven yourself in the past," Zorith said, his voice deep and commanding. "You've killed 2 of my best warriors. But that means nothing in the grand scheme of things. You are a prisoner. Nothing more. Unless—" He paused, his eyes narrowing as if weighing something in his mind. "Lasara, what is it you think we should do with her?" Lasara's gaze flicked briefly to Emily before she spoke. "She's a liability. She may not be one of us, but she has strength. I say we let her fight." Zorith studied Emily for a long moment. "Fight?" he asked, his voice low. "Fight against my own people?" "I don't know your people," Emily replied, her voice firm. "But I know what it means to survive. And if you want me to prove my worth, then let me fight. Let me show you that I'm not just a prisoner." Zorith's lips curled into a smile, a rare, almost imperceptible movement. "You want to fight for your life? Very well. But know this, human. If you fail, there will be no mercy." Emily didn't flinch. She had no choice now. The Erics had offered her a challenge, and she wasn't going to back down. She was going to fight, and she was going to win. Not just for her survival, but for a chance to change the way the Erics saw her. As the horns sounded once more, the camp erupted into movement. The battle was about to begin. Zorith's warriors moved with purpose, their steps synchronized as they prepared for war. Emily felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was no longer just about survival. It was about proving herself to the Erics, about earning her place among them. And she was ready. The tension in the air was electric as Emily, Lasara, and the rest of the warriors stepped into the clearing, ready to face whatever danger awaited them. The battle had begun, and Emily Barnes was no longer just a captive. She was a fighter. The battlefield was chaos. The Wreck clan had finally made their move, launching an all-out assault on the Erics camp. The ground shook beneath Emily's feet as blasts from energy weapons reverberated through the air. The sound of clashing metal, the hiss of charging plasma, and the cries of war filled the night. Emily's heart pounded, but her focus was sharper than ever. This was her moment. There was no going back now. Zorith had given her the chance to prove herself, and she wasn't about to waste it. The Erics warriors, despite their raw strength, fought with a ferocity that matched the Wreck clan's viciousness. Emily had never seen anything like it. The Erics were tactical, coordinated, their moves as graceful as they were deadly. But the Wreck clan was no less formidable, massive, brutish warriors armed with energy blades that crackled with deadly force. Emily didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, her body instinctively falling into the rhythm of battle. Her hands found a discarded spear, its shaft cool against her fingers. The moment she gripped it, a surge of determination flooded through her. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Lysara was already in the thick of the fight, her white hair flying behind her as she slashed through the wrecked clan's front line. Emily followed her, staying close to the skilled warrior, but carving her own path through the enemy. Her movements were sharp, calculated, her spear thrusting with deadly precision. Every strike, every move, was a step toward earning the respect of the Eriks, and perhaps more importantly, her own survival. Impressive, human, Lysara called over her shoulder as she parried a strike from a wreck warrior and spun to deliver a lethal blow. Her eyes flicked to Emily with something resembling approval. "You've got more fight in you than I thought." Emily didn't answer. Her focus was on the wreck warrior charging toward her, a jagged blade raised high. The spear in her hands felt right, its weight comforting, even though she had never wielded one before. Without thinking, she spun, sidestepping the warrior's swing, and drove the spear into his side. The alien warrior staggered back with a surprised grunt before collapsing to the ground. Lysara glanced at Emily again, a flicker of respect passing through her eyes, but she said nothing more. Emily didn't need words. The feeling of victory coursed through her veins as she fought her way deeper into the heart of the battle. As the conflict raged on, the sounds of battle gradually shifted. The wreck clan's attack began to falter. Their warriors, despite their size and brute strength, were losing ground. The Eriks were pushing them back, their superior tactics and unwavering focus turning the tide of the battle. It was becoming clear that Emily wasn't the only one who had underestimated the Eriks. They were a force to be reckoned with. But as the wreck clan began to retreat, Emily's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. She could see it in the way some of the Eriks' warriors were moving, too rigid, too focused on the immediate threat. She glanced around, her instincts screaming at her that there was more to this attack than it seemed. Her heart skipped a beat when she spotted Zorith across the clearing. The Eriks' leader was standing tall, surveying the battlefield with cold precision. But then, something caught his eye, something far off in the distance, beyond the wreck clan's retreating forces. A horn blared, loud and commanding, as dark shapes began to emerge from the trees, slowly advancing toward the camp. Shadows, thick and moving like smoke, shimmered around them. Emily's pulse quickened as she realized what was happening. The Void Walkers were here. Her breath caught in her throat. The legends of the Void Walkers, the ancient, evil creatures that could step between worlds, were no longer just stories. They were real, and they were closing in on the Eriks' camp. Zorith's face darkened as he saw them too, his expression shifting from the calm command of a warrior to the cold certainty of a leader who had faced death too many times. He raised his hand, and the Eriks' warriors around him immediately fell into formation, their eyes narrowing as they prepared for yet another battle. "This is not over," Zorith said, his voice a low growl. "Get ready. They will test us now, and they will not stop until we are destroyed." Lysara moved toward Emily, her face set with resolve. "This battle has shifted," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We must join with the warriors. We cannot fight them alone." Emily nodded, her hand tightening around the spear's shaft. She had fought her way through the wreck clan, but this was different. The Void Walkers were no mere creatures of flesh and blood. They were something far darker, something that would test the limits of even the Eriks' formidable strength. As the Void Walkers drew closer, their glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness, the Eriks' warriors seemed to stand taller. They might have been fierce, but even they were afraid of the ancient evil that approached. The air grew thick with tension as Zorith barked orders to his warriors, preparing them for what was to come. Emily's breath quickened as she stepped alongside Lysara and the others. She could feel the weight of the sword at her side, the energy coursing through it, as if it were alive. The ancient blade had been forged for a time like this, a weapon to wield against enemies far older and more dangerous than any of the Eriks had faced in centuries. "This is what we have trained for," Lysara said, her eyes flicking to Emily. "Stay close. Trust your instincts. And remember, we fight together." The Void Walker's eerie, otherworldly whispers grew louder, sending chills down Emily's spine. But something else pulsed within her, a deep, unwavering conviction. The battle was far from over, and Emily had proven she was more than just a prisoner. She was a fighter. And now, it was time for her to face the ultimate challenge. The time for survival had ended. The time for victory had begun. The first rays of the morning sun had barely touched the camp when Zorith summoned Emily to the center of the battlefield. The Eric's warriors, now visibly worn from the chaos of the night, gathered around, their expressions a mix of wariness and curiosity. The battle had raged on long after midnight, but the dawn was now quiet, ominously quiet. In the distance, the remnants of the wrecked clan scattered through the trees, retreating with their tails between their legs. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was Emily's next move. Lasara stood beside her, her face unreadable, her sword gleaming in the light. Emily couldn't help but notice the way the other Eric's warriors glanced at them, whispers buzzing through the air. Emily wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was part of something bigger now, part of the Eric's. Zorith stepped forward, his commanding presence silencing the murmurs of the warriors around him. His amber eyes locked onto Emily, sizing her up. There was no trace of the merciless leader who had once viewed her as nothing more than a threat. Now, there was a strange flicker of respect in his gaze. "You have fought well, human," Zorith said, his voice firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. "But now you will prove yourself. You've killed, you've bled, and you've survived. But those are not enough for the Eric's. You will face the trials, and only then will you earn your place among us." The word trials hung in the air like a weight. Emily had heard of the Eric's trials, ancient tests designed to measure a warrior's worth, strength, and loyalty. But she hadn't expected to be a part of them. She had expected death, or at best, a dishonorable exile. Instead, Zorith had given her a chance to prove herself, something far more valuable than any mercy. "You will undergo 3 trials," Zorith continued. "The trial of strength, the trial of wisdom, and the trial of spirit. Fail any of them, and you will die. Succeed, and you will become one of us." His gaze turned cold, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The trials are unforgiving. You will face the best we have to offer. Only the worthy survive." Emily's heart raced as she stood there, the weight of Zorith's words sinking in. These were no ordinary challenges. These were the lifeblood of the Eric's people, the foundation of their honor. This was the ultimate test. Lasara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You may not survive. The trial of strength alone will break many. But if you do, you will be one of us. You will carry the honor of our people. You will wield Soul Striker." Emily felt the familiar weight of the sword at her side. It pulsed with a strange energy, as if it had become part of her. She had never been one to back down from a challenge. Her life had been a series of trials, each one more difficult than the last. This was her moment. "I'll fight," Emily said, her voice steady, her hands gripping Soul Striker tightly. "And I'll win." Zorith gave her a curt nod, then turned and gestured to a massive arena that had been constructed at the heart of the camp. It was a crude circle, surrounded by sharpened stakes, the earth beneath it packed hard with the weight of hundreds of feet. The ground was stained with the remnants of yesterday's bloodshed, and the air still smelled of gunpowder and sweat. The first trial would begin here. The trial of strength. Emily stepped forward, her legs steady beneath her, her eyes focused on the circle ahead. This was it. This was where she would prove herself, not just to the Eric's, but to herself. A massive figure emerged from the shadows. A Talker warrior, one of the largest and most battle-hardened of them all. His name was Dorn, and he had earned his place as one of the fiercest warriors in Zorith's army. His broad shoulders were covered in scars, his armor dented from countless battles. He carried a massive hammer, its head glowing with a strange, blue energy. "Dorn is our champion," Zorith said, his voice like a stone dropped into a lake. "Defeat him, and you will prove your strength. Fail, and you will be nothing more than a corpse." Emily's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary opponent. Dorn was a mountain of muscle and skill, but she wasn't about to back down. The sword in her hand felt like an extension of her arm now, its runes faintly glowing with the energy that surged through her body. She had fought harder battles, and she was determined to win this one. Dorn charged first, his massive hammer swinging in a deadly arc toward her. Emily leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow, the air singing with the speed of it. She landed on her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The trial had begun. Dorn swung again, this time in a horizontal arc, aiming to take her head off. Emily ducked and rolled beneath his blow, the ground beneath her scraping her skin. She sprang to her feet, her mind racing. He was fast, faster than she expected, but she was quicker. She sidestepped as Dorn swung once more, and with a quick twist of her body, Emily thrust Soul Striker into his side. The blade sank into his armor, but it wasn't enough to pierce deep. Dorn roared in pain, his hammer lifting for another strike. But Emily didn't hesitate. She lunged again, this time aiming for his exposed neck. The sword's edge flashed in the sunlight as it slashed through the air, connecting with his armor once more. The force of the blow caused Dorn to stagger, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Emily wasn't done. She pressed forward, using the momentum of her attack to drive him back. Soul Striker glowed brighter now, its runes blazing with blue light as if guiding her every move. With a final, powerful thrust, Emily drove the sword into the gap in Dorn's armor, piercing his side. He collapsed to his knees, groaning in pain. Zoratha's voice echoed across the arena. First blood goes to the human. The crowd of Eric's warriors murmured in disbelief. They had watched countless warriors fall to Dorn in this very arena, but now, a human had struck him down. The trial of strength was hers, but there was no time to rest. 2 more trials remain, Zorath said, his voice filled with something close to admiration. The next trial will test your mind. Emily wiped the sweat from her brow, her muscles aching from the fight. But she didn't let herself slow down. She had come this far, and she wasn't stopping now. The morning after the trial of strength came with an eerie calm. Mist rolled over the valley, blanketing the Eric settlement in a ghostly stillness. Emily stood outside her tent, the cool air stinging her lungs. The Eric's warriors had begun to regard her differently now. The suspicious glances had softened into something else, respect. She'd faced their strongest champion and won. But her victory came with consequences. She could feel it in the way Zorath and Lysara avoided speaking openly in front of her. Something was changing within the camp, something the Erics weren't ready to admit. Zorath had declared the second trial would begin at sunset. The trial of wisdom, he'd called it. But there was unease in his tone. Emily didn't know why until she noticed Lysara standing apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains that surrounded their settlement. When Emily approached, Lysara didn't turn. You fought well, she said softly. My father was impressed. Impressed? Emily repeated. Or concerned. At that, Lysara looked over her shoulder, her amber eyes gleaming faintly. Both, she admitted. He sees something in you. The sword responds to you. Soul Striker has not done that in generations. Emily glanced down at the weapon hanging at her side. The faint runes on the blade pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. Since her fight with Dorn, she'd felt connected to it in ways she couldn't explain. When she slept, she dreamed in flashes of light and shadow, memories that weren't hers. What do you know about this sword? Emily asked quietly. Lysara's expression shifted. It is older than the Erics, she said. Forged before our recorded history. My people believe it carries the strength and memories of its wielders. But, she hesitated. There are other stories, ones the elders do not speak of. Stories that tell of Soul Striker awakening only when darkness returns to the world. Emily frowned. Darkness? The Void Walkers, Lysara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The creatures you saw during the battle. They should not exist. They were sealed away long ago, before even my ancestors' time. Emily's mind raced. She remembered the way the shadows had moved, fluid, intelligent, hungry. You're saying they're real, she murmured. And they're coming back. Lysara nodded grimly. The council denies it. They say the Void Walkers are myth. But the signs are clear. The barrier stones that protect our borders have been weakening for months. And now the sword. She gestured toward Soul Striker. Has awakened. It can only mean one thing. Emily looked down at the glowing runes, a chill crawling up her spine. The darkness is coming back. Lysara's voice hardened. And someone inside the camp is helping it. That revelation struck Emily like a punch to the gut. You think there's a traitor? Lysara turned to face her fully now. I don't think. I know. The Void Walkers can't cross into our realm without help from within. The energy required to open their gate is immense. Only an Eric's elder would have that knowledge. Emily felt the weight of her situation shift again. She'd come here as a captive, survived as a fighter, and now she was being pulled into a war that was bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. "So what do we do?" she asked. Lasara hesitated, then stepped closer. "We find the traitor before the final trial. My father plans to hold it tomorrow at dawn. But if the traitor moves before then, the entire camp could fall." Emily nodded. "Then we'll find them tonight." Lasara studied her for a long moment, her eyes softening slightly. "You are not what I expected, human," she said quietly. "When I first saw you, I thought you were reckless, arrogant. But now—" She stopped herself, glancing away. Emily smiled faintly. "You thought I was trouble." Lasara's lips twitched. "You still are." For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them strange but familiar, like two warriors who had fought on opposite sides for too long and finally found common ground. Then the horn sounded, the signal for the second trial. Lasara straightened immediately. "It's time." They walked together toward the base of the mountain that loomed behind the camp. There, an entrance gaped in the rock, a tunnel carved ages ago, its walls etched with glowing symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly light. "The Trial of Wisdom," Zorith announced, his deep voice echoing through the clearing. "You will enter alone, human. The mountain maze will test your judgment and your spirit. Only those who can face their own truth emerge alive." Emily nodded, tightening her grip on Soul Striker. "And if I fail, then your bones will feed the mountain," Zorith said simply. Without another word, Emily stepped into the darkness. The air inside was cold and still. Each footstep echoed softly, swallowed by the endless tunnels that branched in every direction. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, illuminating strange carvings, figures locked in eternal combat, stars colliding, worlds burning. As she walked deeper, the air grew heavier, and a strange whisper filled her mind. "Not yours, yet yours." She froze. The voice wasn't external, it came from within her head. "Soul Striker," she whispered, glancing at the sword. Its runes shimmered faintly in response. The whisper grew louder, forming words. "You carry the burden of many. The blade remembers. The blade warns." Her pulse quickened. "Warns me of what?" "The shadow walks among light." Then silence. Emily's grip tightened on the hilt. The traitor. Whoever was working with the Voidwalkers, they weren't just a threat to the Erics. They were a threat to everything. Hours passed as she navigated the twisting tunnels. The path wound through chambers filled with puzzles, runes that had to be aligned, symbols that had to be mirrored. Every mistake triggered hidden traps, arrows of light, bursts of flame, but Emily's instincts carried her through. The sword's glow brightened each time she made the right choice, guiding her deeper toward the heart of the mountain. Finally, she reached a vast chamber where a massive stone tablet stood. On it was a single word carved in glowing script, truth. The moment she read it, the ground trembled. The air shimmered, and suddenly, she wasn't in the chamber anymore. She was back in the Eric's camp, surrounded by fire and screaming. Lasara was fighting shadowy figures, her sword cutting through the dark. Zorith lay wounded near the center, his voice calling her name. "Emily, the gate. Stop them." She turned and saw one of the Eric's elders standing near a glowing portal, chanting in a language she didn't understand. His face twisted in a snarl as he turned toward her. It was Therek, the council's oldest member. Then, just as suddenly, the vision vanished. Emily gasped as she found herself back in the chamber, her knees trembling. The mountain was silent again, the air still. She had seen the truth. Therek, the elder, was the traitor. Emily tightened her grip on Soul Striker, determination burning in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting for a world that didn't even realize it was on the brink of destruction. And she would stop the darkness, no matter the cost. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the Eric settlement as the horn blew again, signaling the beginning of the final trial. The air felt thick with tension. Every warrior in the camp stood at attention, their eyes on the center of the arena. But Emily wasn't focused on them. She wasn't even looking at the towering form of Zorith, who had just taken his place as the central figure in the proceedings. No, Emily's gaze was fixed on one thing, the stone structure that stood at the far end of the camp. It was there that the traitor, the Eric's elder Therek, had been preparing the ritual. The dark power that had awakened in the mountain maze had only grown stronger. Emily knew now that Therek was working with the Voidwalkers. His purpose wasn't just to test her. It was to bring about the destruction of the Eriks, perhaps even the destruction of the world itself. The sword, Soul Striker, had been guiding her this whole time, not just with physical strength, but with knowledge. It was a conduit of wisdom, and now it pulsed with urgency. It was time to end this. Lysara appeared beside her, her face grim, her eyes scanning the camp for any signs of the Voidwalker's return. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low but filled with the weight of the moment. "I'm ready," Emily replied, her hand resting on the hilt of Soul Striker. It had become more than just a weapon. It was a bond between her and the Eriks, a symbol of the strength they had shared. Today, it would also be the key to stopping Therek and whatever dark forces had been unleashed. As the final trial began, Zorith stepped forward, his powerful voice booming across the field. "The human has earned the right to fight for our survival," he declared, his eyes locked on Emily. "Today, we face not just trials of strength or wisdom, but a battle for our future." The camp erupted in cheers, but Emily's focus remained singular. The Eriks were ready. She was ready, but the ground began to tremble. A deep, unnatural rumble echoed beneath their feet, the earth shaking as the barrier stones that had once protected the Eriks' camp flickered, their light dimming. A shadow fell over the camp, dark, shifting figures moving through the air like smoke. The Voidwalkers were here. "Stay with me," Lysara said urgently, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We have to reach the ritual stone before it's too late." Emily nodded, but she didn't need to be told. She felt the pulse of Soul Striker, urging her forward. With one last glance at Lysara, Emily sprinted toward the stone structure where Therek had begun his dark ritual. The air crackled with energy as they neared the stone. Therek stood before it, his arms raised, chanting in a low, guttural tone. The runes carved into the stone glowed with a sickly green light, and the Voidwalkers began to materialize from the shadows, their eyes glowing red as they advanced toward the center of the camp. "You can't stop it," Therek hissed, his eyes filled with madness as he turned to face them. "The void is already here. You're too late." Lysara drew her sword, her eyes flashing with fury. "You betrayed us," she shouted. "You've doomed us all." Emily stepped forward, her grip tight on Soul Striker. "I don't think so," she said, her voice steady. "This ends now." The moment the words left her mouth, the Voidwalkers lunged toward them. Their movements were fast, inhumanly so, and their presence chilled the air. But Emily was ready. Soul Striker hummed in her hands, its energy flaring as the runes blazed brighter than ever. She met the first Voidwalker head-on, her blade slicing through the air with a precision she'd never known. The creature recoiled as the sword connected, the dark energy it radiated flickering before vanishing into nothingness. But there were more, too many more, and they were closing in fast. Lysara fought beside her, her sword flashing as she cut down 2 more Voidwalkers. "We need to stop Therek before it's too late," she called out, parrying a strike from another shadowy figure. Emily turned toward the elder, her eyes narrowing with determination. She couldn't waste any more time fighting the Voidwalkers. They had to stop the ritual. She charged toward Therek, Soul Striker raised high. Therek's eyes widened as Emily approached, a snarl crossing his face. "Fool," he spat, raising his hands to summon more dark energy. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The void will consume everything." The air around Therek pulsed with unnatural power, but Emily didn't falter. The sword in her hands seemed to grow hotter with each step, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. When she was close enough, she swung the sword in a wide arc, cleaving through the energy Therek had summoned and striking the stone ritual pillar. The stone cracked, splintering under the force of the blow, and a shockwave of energy erupted, knocking everyone to the ground. The Voidwalkers shrieked in agony, their forms dissolving into shadows as the stone's power was shattered. Therek screamed in rage, his body writhing as the dark magic spiraled out of control. "No!" Therek bellowed, his eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't the end." But Emily didn't give him a chance to finish. With one final, decisive blow, she plunged Soul Striker into the heart of the stone. The energy that had been swirling around them all collapsed in on itself, and a deafening silence filled the air. When the dust settled, Emily found herself standing amidst the ruins of the ritual stone. The Void Walkers were gone, their presence wiped from existence. Therek, the traitor, had fallen, his body crumpled to the ground. Lysara stood beside her, breathing heavily, but with a look of disbelief on her face. We did it," she said, her voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. Emily nodded, her body aching from the battle, but her heart swelling with triumph. "It's over. The void is gone." Zorith stepped forward, his eyes scanning the aftermath of the battle. "You've saved us, human," he said, his voice filled with quiet respect. "You've proven yourself worthy of the Eriks." The warriors around them began to gather, murmuring in approval. Emily felt the weight of their gazes, but this time, it wasn't filled with suspicion. It was filled with honor. "You're one of us now," Zorith continued, his gaze steady. "And we will stand together to protect this world." Emily looked at Lysara, the sword still glowing faintly in her hand. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was part of something bigger, a new future, one forged in the heat of battle and the strength of honor. And as the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the camp, Emily realized something. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for a new world, a new alliance, one that would stand against the darkness, no matter what came next. Her journey had only just begun.